What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and last week we got the much anticipated sequel to the indie darling Oxenfree, aptly named Oxenfree 2 Lost Signals, and of course I've played it and I want to talk about it. So without further ado, let's rock. My barrier to entry to the original Oxenfree game was very low. I believe I downloaded it for free on Xbox with games with gold, and to be honest with you, a lot of times those games are not very good, so my expectations were set very, very low. However, as soon as I started playing it, I immediately realized why it has such a dedicated fan base. It is a shining example of what an indie game can be when it's made by a small but dedicated development team that has a clear vision of what type of game they want to make. Therefore, I was really excited when I heard that they were making a sequel to Oxenfree, but unfortunately it took several years for them to develop it, and I play so many games, especially indie games, are kind of out of sight, out of mind for me. If I don't think about them, I kind of forget about them. I move on to the next game, and so I honestly had forgotten that this game was even coming out until about a month ago, and that kind of rekindled my excitement for the game. I was very curious to see, now that I was going to have to pay money and have legit expectations, if I was going to enjoy the sequel as much as I did the original Oxenfree game. Set a few years after the events of its predecessor, Lost Signals follows Riley, a woman trying to cope with her complicated past, who takes an environmental job in her childhood home off the coast of Edwards Island, the scene of the original game. Shortly after her arrival, Riley meets up with Jacob, a handyman who is assigned to help her plant transmitters throughout the town. Like the original game, the sequel was also developed by Night School Studio. After the success of the original game, Night School was bought out by Netflix, who is trying to break into the video game business. Therefore, Netflix published Oxenfree 2. Members can actually play the first game as well as the sequel for free on their mobile devices. Lost Signals is also available on PC, PS4 and 5, and Nintendo Switch. Despite being a Netflix subscriber, I decided to play this on my PS5. There's nothing wrong with mobile gaming. Play the games how you want to. I just personally am not much of a mobile gamer, so therefore I decided to play this on my PS5. It is, however, pretty cheap. It's less than $20. I do think that that has a lot to do with the length. Like the first game, it will take you about less than 10 hours, depending on how much you explore and if you want to play the game multiple times. The game, like the original, is designed with multiple endings, so it kind of wants you to play it more than once. Sure, I have my go-to genres like everybody else, but whether I'm watching a movie, a TV show, or in this case playing a video game, I don't care about genre. Quality is quality. I'm all about finding gems no matter what the genre is. That being said, Oxenfree 2 is not going to be everybody's cup of tea. If you don't like walking sims, you can probably go ahead and just skip this game. Don't get me wrong, I still want you to watch this video and maybe smash that like button, as the kids say. Consider subscribing. I did set a goal to hit 500 subs by the end of the year, and it'd be awesome if you'd help me out with that. Personally, I find these side-scrolling, narrative-driven games like Oxenfree to be a breath of fresh air. I do have a big boy job, and after a long day at work, sometimes I don't have the mental bandwidth for a game like God of War or a Resident Evil game. So sometimes it's nice to have a game like this that I can kind of just sit back and relax and just kind of lose myself in a story. Games like Oxenfree and its sequel allow me to do just that. And this might be kind of a hot take because the original Oxenfree game has a dedicated fan base, but I actually preferred the sequel to the original, and much of that can be contributed to the excellent story. Don't get me wrong, the story in the first Oxenfree game is good. It just didn't stay with me in the same way that I have a feeling this one will. Side note, while I do suggest you play the original game because it is good and you will get more out of the sequel if you have, it is not required required. They obviously developed Lost Signals with new players in mind. And the main reason I enjoyed this story more was because I connected with Riley and Jacob way more than the original cast of characters. I'm only a few years older than Riley and Jacob, so I could better relate with where they are in their lives than a few teenagers in the original game. I also have a pretty complicated relationship with my father, like Riley does in this game, so those story beats hit really hard on a personal level. Riley and Jacob's relationship just felt so natural, and a lot of that has to do with Jacob's small talk. That dude was always asking her questions, telling her stories, telling her jokes, and it really helps the game because at its core, it's a walking sim, and there's a lot of backtracking, and I know that's gonna rub some people the wrong way, but me personally, I didn't really care because I was kind of lost in those conversations. And I know I brought this up during my Plague Tale Requiem review, but that game did a great job of building the sister and brother relationship. And because I cared so much about those characters, when the shit hit the fan, I was really invested. And the same can be said about Oxenfree 2 with Riley and Jacob. It certainly doesn't hurt that Lost Signals dialogue system, like the original, is the best in the biz. They're constantly giving you great options. There was actually a couple of times where I ran out of time to pick a dialogue option because I couldn't decide which one I thought was the best option. I think my favorite thing about the dialogue is it just feels so natural. It feels like that's what actually people would say in that scenario. A lot of times, whether it's video games or movies or whatever, of course I know it's scripted, but it just feels so artificial. It doesn't feel like that's what a regular person would say in that scenario, but you don't get that in Oxenfree 2. Again, it just feels so natural. Of course, some of that praise needs to be heaped on the great voice cast for bringing life to the written word, but I just love how it feels like regular people talking to regular people in this game. A lot of times you'll be having a conversation with Jacob and it'll kind of trail off, or they'll kind of circle back to something that they talked about earlier. I know that doesn't sound like much, they just sound like little things, but again, it feels like regular people talking to other regular people, and all those little things add up at the end of the day. You also have a radio that allows you to communicate with other characters in the area, just in case you get bored with Jacob, which I doubt it. Honestly, your biggest risk of boredom is unfortunately with the gameplay. Like I said earlier, this game won't be for everybody, but if you go into it with the right frame of mind, you can still enjoy it. Unfortunately, there's no way around it. The gameplay is just very simple. There's a lot of walking and backtracking. Again, I do appreciate the small talk between the characters, so I do think that you'll forget about the walking. The thing that honestly bummed me out the most wasn't the walking and backtracking. It was actually the missed opportunities with the gameplay, especially with this cool time travel mechanic. So there is some platforming that we'll get to here in a little bit in the review. However, you will occasionally come across these dead ends where it's not clear where you're supposed to go, but you can actually time travel back to a point where that obstruction is no longer there, and you can kind of platform around it and then jump back into the original timeline, which is cool. I've seen it done it better in other games, so it's definitely not breaking the mold in this one, but it was really cool. So I was kind of bummed that you only got to do it like twice, if I remember correctly. I wish that there's more of that in this game. I was also really surprised by how many loading screens were in this game. Basically, anytime that you went from one area into the next, which was really frequent in this game, you'd be hit with a loading screen. And like I said earlier, I did play this on PS5, and maybe I'm just spoiled and this might sound bougie, but on a PS5, I don't expect a ton of loading screens. And I'm not being nitpicky for the sake of being nitpicky with the loading screens. It did actually affect my experience with this game because I enjoyed the conversation so much. If you went from one area to the next, you'd be hit with a loading screen. It didn't matter if you were in the middle of a conversation or not. Yes, the conversation would pick up after the loading screen, but it would just kind of break the flow for me. And so I got to the point where I would just literally wait for the conversation to end before I moved to the next area. And a lot of times that would take a while. So I'd just be kind of just standing there waiting for whatever person that was talking to shut the hell up. As I've mentioned in my past reviews, platformers are my favorite genre. While Oxenfree 2 is the simplest of platformers, most of the platforming just involved pressing the X button to climb or jump. Also, the occasional puzzles were just as simple as the platforming. However, I do want to give this game credit where credit's due. It has just enough platforming and puzzles to scratch that itch for me. When it comes to gameplay, I'm usually pretty forgiving, especially with a game like this where my expectations for the gameplay weren't sky high from the start. But you know what can make me overlook those shortcomings? Two things really: a killer story, which we've already talked about, and an environment that pulls me in, and Lost Signals had both of those in spades. I absolutely love the art style of this game. It reminded me of a watercolor painting. I didn't mind that it took time to get places. I didn't mind the walking and backtracking because I enjoyed looking around so much. While I don't necessarily think that Oxenfree will scare people, it does have a creepy vibe to it. You do have to interact with these specters that can make you uneasy, so any horror fans out there, you might get a little bit more out of this game than most. And the soundtrack and sound design definitely play a huge role in the creep factor for this game. Any fans of the Stranger Things intro like myself will really dig the music in this game. For gamers who play many action-heavy games, narrative-driven side-scrollers like Oxenfree 2 Lost Signals can be a refreshing breath of fresh air. If players go into Oxenfree 2 with the right mindset, I am confident they will enjoy its rich storytelling and beautiful atmosphere despite its lackluster gameplay. I'm giving Oxenfree 2 Lost Signals 3.5 stars out of 5. But as always, those are just my thoughts on this game. I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below, especially if you're a fan of the original. Let me know how you felt about the sequel. Of course, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button, as the kids say. Consider subscribing. If you do, ding that bell. Like I mentioned earlier, I did make a goal of getting 500 subs on this channel by the end of the year, so you'd really help me out by consider subscribing and dinging that bell. I put out weekly content, so if you like gaming related content, definitely consider subscribing and dinging that bell. But until next video, take it easy. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy, and we were just talking and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?